The walls of my birthing chamber are cracking, and I can hear my daughters screaming through the floor. My name is Yithrazel, and I am the last queen of the Kelvash hive. 3 days ago, I had 4 colonies, 12,000 daughters, and a future stretching out longer than any star could burn. Now I have 1 chamber, 40 guards, and a swarm of machines eating my world alive from the outside in. We call them the Devourer Swarm. Nobody knows where they came from. They do not speak. They do not bargain. They land. They strip a planet of every scrap of metal and flesh, and they leave behind a graveyard. I watched them take my second colony in 11 hours. 11 hours to erase 40,000 years of history. When the swarm reached my homeworld, I did what every queen is trained to do. I sent a distress call through the Concord Relay, the great network that links every civilized species in this part of the galaxy. I called the Skarn Dominion, who traded weapons with us for 3 centuries. Silence. I called the Vex Choir, who once sang peace songs with my mother at a treaty signing. Silence. I called the Illumined Courts, who owed my hive a life debt older than my own bloodline. Silence. Nobody came. Nobody even answered. The swarm was already spreading toward their borders too, and every great power in the galaxy suddenly discovered it had better things to do than save a dying hive. There was one voice I never called: the humans. Every species in the Concord has an opinion about humans, and none of it is kind. They are young, barely 100 years into space travel, loud, impulsive, and according to the treaties, too dangerous to be given open access to the relay network. The Concord keeps them boxed inside their own little cluster of stars, watched, restricted, and quietly feared. My own mother used to say humans were a fire that had not yet learned it could burn the house down. I believed her. So when my final chamber began to shake, when the swarm broke through my last defense ring, and my daughters began to fall silent, one by one, over the comm channel, I did not call the humans. I broke protocol instead. I opened a channel with no destination at all, an old distress frequency, unencrypted, meant for nobody and everybody at once. I did not ask for help. I did not even expect anyone to hear it. I simply spoke. I said that my hive was dying, that my daughters were dying, and that no one was coming. Then I closed the channel, gathered my remaining guards, and prepared to make my final stand at the birthing chamber door, because if the swarm wanted my last daughters, they would have to go through me first. 40 minutes later, my sensors screamed at me. Something had entered the system. It was not a Concord fleet. My scanners struggled to even classify it at first, because the ships were moving through a wormhole lane that my systems flatly refused to believe was survivable. 7 vessels, human design, dropping out of transit, at a velocity that should have torn them apart. I remember thinking, for one strange second, that they must be lost, that they had made a terrible mistake and stumbled into a dying world by accident. I opened a channel, bracing myself for the usual dance. Demands, terms, a price for rescue, because that is how the Concord does things. Everything has a cost, and rescue is always the most expensive service of all. A voice answered instead, calm and fast, speaking in careful Concord standard, with a strange, clipped accent. A woman named Ellen Marsh, commanding officer of the lead ship. She did not ask what I could offer. She did not ask about my hive's resources or my colony's mineral rights. She asked one question only. Where are your children? I gave her the coordinates of the birthing chamber, still not understanding, still waiting for the terms that never came. Instead, her ships broke formation and dove straight into the swarm. I watched on my monitors as 5 dropships tore through the outer defense ring, using their own hulls as shields for a species they had never met, defending a hive that had never once, in 100 years, offered them anything but suspicion and closed borders. Their weapons were not built for a fight like this. Their ships were built for carrying settlers to new worlds, for hauling cargo and hope across empty space, not for war. And still they came. I asked Ellen, over the open channel, why? Why come at all? Why risk your people for a hive that never answered your calls, that never opened its doors to you, that looked at your species and saw only a danger to be contained? Her answer has stayed with me every day since. She said that somewhere out there, Someone was screaming into the dark with no one required to listen, and her people had never learned how to hear a thing like that and simply turn away. The battle for my birthing chamber was not clean or easy. I will not pretend it was. Good soldiers were lost on both sides that day, human and Kelvash alike, and I carry every one of those names with me still. But when the swarm finally pulled back, driven off by a combined defense no one could have predicted, my chamber was still standing. My last daughters were still breathing. A human medic named Owen Bell was the first to step through the ruined doorway, kneeling beside my youngest hatchlings, without a moment of hesitation, checking on creatures that looked nothing like him, that spoke no language he understood, as if this was simply what one did when children were frightened and hurt. I remember watching him and thinking of every warning my mother ever gave me about the fire that burns down houses. She was wrong, or perhaps she was only telling half the story. In the days that followed, more human ships arrived, not to claim my world or demand tribute for their aid, but to help clear the wreckage and rebuild what could be rebuilt. I asked Ellen, once the worst of it was over, what her government would want in return. She looked at me the way one looks at a strange and slightly sad question, and said her government did not know she was here yet. She had heard the call on a civilian relay array meant for tracking her own colonists, a frequency she was never supposed to have access to, and she had simply pointed her ships toward the signal and gone. No orders, no treaty, no debt to collect. Just a voice in the dark, and a decision to answer it. I think often about the century my hive spent believing humanity was the danger the Concord warned us about, too unpredictable, too willing to bleed for causes that were not their own. I understand now that this was never a flaw in them at all. It was the very thing that saved my daughters when every ancient, wise, and careful power in the galaxy chose silence instead. Tonight, months later, aboard a human relief ship carrying the last of my hive toward a new home, I watch my daughters learning human words for things my language never needed before. Volunteer, rescue, no charge. They stumble over the sounds, laughing, safe, alive. I sent one final distress call, with no name attached, and no destination chosen, never expecting an answer at all. Only humanity came. And I will spend the rest of my long life making certain that when the humans one day send out their own call into the dark, my daughters, and their daughters after them, will be the first ones through the door.